We're going to go back to the Grenfell Tower story now, and there's a pretty shocking exchange yesterday at Kensington and Chelsea Town Hall with the first cabinet meeting, which was due to be convened after the tragic fire. And this is what transpired, because Nick Paget-Brown, the leader of the council, Conservative leader of the council, said that because there were public and press around in the meeting, that he was advised by, I imagine, the head of legal services for the council, that the meeting couldn't take place, which is pretty horrific in a democracy. Anyway, let's listen to a little transcript of that now, or a recording of that now, and you can hear, as part of that, the voices of Nick Paget-Brown, and also intervening the Labour leader of Kensington and Chelsea Council, Robert Atkinson.
We can't have an unprejudiced discussion in this room with the public inquiry that's about to take place if journalists are recording and writing our comments.
Clearly they are. Who let them in? You've spent a day talking about the security of this meeting, and then 5 minutes before it starts, the press are here. Now you're telling us we can't have a proper meeting?
I'm told the press are here because of the result of legal intervention, and that therefore means that we cannot have a discussion as we were intending to have, because that will prejudice the public inquiry.
That
is the legal advice I've received, and I therefore have to declare the meeting closed.
So what you've done is you've actually used this as an opportunity for you to make a statement, and nobody else gets to say anything at all. You could have issued that statement, in fact you should have issued that statement 8 days ago.
I would like to have had a conversation, but I'm advised that we can't do that because we will prejudice
Absolutely, yes. This is why I am calling for your resignation.
So, yes, that was Robert Atkinson, the Labour leader of the council, replying to Nick Paget-Brown, and there's been developments, and we're joined on the line by Robert Atkinson now from London. Robert, what's happened?
Hello, I gather that Nick Paget-Brown has finally resigned.
Can you just give us, from your point of view, I mean, obviously you've been meeting with residents, in fact, I believe your ward is actually the area of Grenfell Tower, what your impression is now about what has happened so far and what's going to happen in the future?
Well, I'm glad that Nick Paget-Brown and the leader of the Tenants Managed Organisation have both gone today, because that helps to clear a way for someone else to get a grip of this council, so that my residents, my grieving residents, my homeless residents, can now be taken care of in a proper and orderly manner. So nothing is going to bring back the up to 100 residents of my ward, but at least once we get some decent leadership from the council, we can make sure that those who have been left behind and those who are grieving can get some decent services and be looked after. That's the least we can do.
Now, you've called them incompetent, you called for them to resign, they've done that. Why have you said that they are incompetent? Because it does seem as if that there are lots and lots of lines from this file lead back to decisions made at Kensington and Chelsea Council.
Yes, I am not speculating as to how the fire happened in the first place. The reason for my anger is simply the way in which they failed to respond once the fire had taken place. Everybody else rose to the challenge. The council completely collapsed.
How would you describe the way they've acted then? Because you're an insider, you've seen what's been going on. It's almost as if we haven't seen very much of Paget-Brown, apart from on Newsnight, where he got actually a fairly easy ride from the Newsnight people.
He disappeared for a week and then came back, and last night tried to pretend that they were back in control and tried to pretend that they had some role in some of the good things that have been taking place in the last week. But actually, good things have happened despite the leadership of Kensington and Chelsea Council, not because of them.
Many people have pointed to the sort of creeping privatisation, arm's length management of these sorts of... We don't really have that very much here in Bristol. In fact, we decided not to have the TMOs. What do you make of the way that the refurbishment and the care for these council properties was managed?
Kensington used to be an old-fashioned patrician council who took responsibility for things like housing, and they did things themselves. It wasn't perfect, but at least you had some leadership and you knew who to go to when there was a problem. This whole experiment of privatisation and of seeking to have outside bodies take over the responsibility of the council has been a complete fiasco, and that is why once there was a tragedy of the size of Grenfell Tower, the council no longer had the people in place to respond to it. They deliberately ran down council services. They went into this ridiculous tri-borough arrangement, which meant that come the crisis, there wasn't people in place.
Now, you've seen this at first hand. What message have you got for other councils around the country, not least of which is our Bristol Council here, about the way they manage their housing?
I think it is very important that we now have a national debate about the proper provision of social housing, both for social cohesion and to make sure that the people of this country are all entitled to a decent place to live. We have ignored the housing needs of large numbers of our population, particularly in London, but in other cities as well, including Bristol. We need to build social housing. It's not complicated. There are not enough houses for ordinary people being built, and I'm calling upon the government to make sure that we now have a proper house building programme and we go back to a system of proper social housing provision.
Some have also said there's been a kind of cleansing going on there, or not necessarily ethnic cleansing, but social cleansing.
Yes. Kensington has been exporting its poor people for at least a decade.
Horrific. And do you think that now that will stop with this wake-up call?
It's a terrible price to pay, and I wouldn't want Grenfell Tower to be described as a wake-up call, but it is a symbol of what has gone wrong with housing and the whole denigration of local government. But local government has always been important, and the attitude of national government has been that local government was not important. They did not give people the money. They carried on piling responsibilities. They encouraged councils to withdraw from direct provision of services, and this is where we've ended up.
Some are also saying that there is a sort of almost like a symbol of this recent general election here, the ideologies between Conservative and Labour. Do you think that's any truth in that?
Yes, I think the era of austerity is over, but I don't want to go into that tonight. I'm still trying to sort out things for my residents. OK, Robert Atkinson, Labour leader of Kensington and Chelsea Council, thanks very much for joining us on the Politics Show. Bye-bye.
Now, Martin, it's quite interesting to hear. He really is quite clearly saying that housing policy and privatisation has got a lot to do with what happened.
Well, I think that's pretty obvious, isn't it? As you say, in Bristol, we've had a lucky escape because we didn't get any of these TMOs, and we've still got social housing or council housing is still managed as it used to be. But I'm sure we need to think about whether we can improve that. I'm sure there will be room for improvement.
We're also hearing that this today that the cladding approved by residents was then quietly by Kensington and Chelsea Council, and the contractors RHIAN swapped for cheaper cladding, and they managed to save £300,000 on that refurbishment. Afsal.
I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned. Firstly, if I can begin just by saying that I welcome the news shared by Councillor Atkinson that Robert Paget-Brown has finally decided to resign. Sadly, it's taken the loss of about 100 lives. I think a lot of lessons must be learnt from this. We are fortunate that in Bristol that we don't have that. I have been in contact with Councillor Paul Smith, who's got the housing remit. Make sure that there is a review conducted. He has been busy visiting most of the 59 high-rise flats that we've got in Bristol to actually ensure that nothing of that nature could actually take place here owing to the cladding safety issues. I think that we really need to have a wider debate around social housing. We have to simply start building more homes. We need the resources from central government. But also, if you look at the chocolate factory development, which is just up the road, the developers can actually hide behind the viability report, which actually, when it came to councillors, was actually an issue redacted. So, going back to the issue about secrecy, seems like there is a culture nationally.
Because that's absolutely appalling. You're being asked to make a decision and contribute to a decision about whether a development can go ahead, and you're actually even as a councillor being allowed to see what. I mean, how on earth can that be excused? It just sounds to me like there's a culture of secrecy here, and when people are up to no good, possibly even in this case with corporate manslaughter charges may come, that they want to cover up the contract, parts of the contract that they don't want you to see.
Sadly, that is the battle that local authorities are currently fighting. This is legislation that was brought in by the previous Tory administration under David Cameron, and it must be repealed. And we've certainly had these conversations with the Labour Party nationally to ensure that not if, but when we come to power, hopefully it'll be within months, that is one of the first pieces of legislation that we'd like to actually remove with immediate effect.
Well, it's literally only about 10 minutes ago that Nick Paget-Brown resigned, so you heard it here first, folks, straight from the horse's mouth, straight from Kensington, Chelsea's Labour leader there. But this whole subject did come up at Prime Minister's Questions, of course, with Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn. I don't know how many there's going to be, actually, because there's going to be a few before they break for the summer. The whole thing seems a little bit farcical, really, in a democracy, and they're just going to have a few of these questions, and then off they go with a very, very fragile majority. So, anyway, let's have a listen now to Wednesday's PMQs.
Why is it that fire inspections, that local authority inspections appear to have missed this essential issue?
I think I can help the Prime Minister with this issue. When you cut local authority expenditure by 40%, you end up with fewer building control inspectors. Mr. Speaker, I was simply making the point, which seems to have upset a lot of members opposite, that when you cut local authority budgets by 40%, we all pay a price in public safety. Fewer inspectors, fewer building control inspectors, fewer planning inspectors, we all pay a price. Mr. Speaker, those cuts to the fire service have meant there are 11,000 fewer firefighters. The public sector pay cap is hitting recruitment and retention right across the public sector. What the tragedy of Grenfell Tower has exposed is the disastrous effects of austerity. This disregard for working class communities, the terrible consequences of deregulation and cutting corners, I urge the Prime Minister to come up with the resources needed to test and remove cladding, retrofit sprinklers, properly fund the fire service and the police, so that all our communities can truly feel safe in their own homes. Mr. Speaker, this disaster must be a wake-up call.
The cladding of tower blocks did not start under this government. It did not start under the previous coalition government. The cladding of tower blocks began under the Blair government. The right honourable gentleman talks about local authority resources and talks about changes to the regulation. In 2005, it was a Labour government that introduced the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order, which changed the requirement to inspect a building on fire safety from the local fire authority, which was usually the fire brigade, to a responsible person. The legislation governing fire safety in tower blocks and this was commented on by the Lakanal House report into that fire. It criticised that 2005 order, which had been put in place by the Labour government.
The Prime Minister's answer must be heard, and it will be. Prime Minister.
And laws which took effect in 2006 ended the practice of routine fire service inspections, passing the responsibility to councils. That is why I say to the right honourable gentleman, this should be an issue that across this House we recognise is a matter that has been developing over decades, is a matter that has occurred under governments of both colours, under councils of all political persuasions, and is something which I would hope we would say we should come together and ensure that we get to the answers of why this has happened over many years, what has gone wrong, and how do we stop it from happening in the future.
That was the Prime Minister replying there to Jeremy Corbyn. But his point, Afsal, really was about cuts to local government. Now, this is carrying on. It's carrying on. In probably about 5-6 years' time, we could be in a situation where there's virtually no funding coming to Bristol from central government. It's like they're sort of cutting off the money bit by bit. They're saying to Bristol City Council, well, you can carry on, but you're going to have to raise money yourself.
40% of cuts, just as Jeremy Corbyn was alluding to local authorities. You can see the tough decisions that we're having to make locally in terms of having to potentially close down all of our public toilets. And now we're faced by that daunting prospect because of central government policy. And I think it's very important that all the core cities, which incidentally are Labour local authorities, to actually sit down and I think that we must unite on this issue.
So why aren't we doing that already? I mean, Marvin's been here for over a year now.
Well, Marvin is having those conversations behind the scenes. There is a lot of work actually taking place.
What, in secret meetings?
No, definitely not secret meetings. No.
we need to hear it, don't we, on a national level, really? I mean, there's no point in having conversations a year on from being elected. It's still something needs to happen, and certainly those conversations should be happening on a national level and in public.